Hello, it's Simon Kidd here in conversation with Michael Peters. I'm in Perth, Western Australia, and Michael is in Beijing, in China, sharing the same time zone, fortunately. And so we'll go straight into our questions for today. So the first question I have thank you, first of all, Michael, for agreeing to the interview. And the first question I have is, what do you think is the biggest challenge we face in education today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the nature of the challenges, giving some thought to this question, the nature of the challenges that we face have changed over time. And today, I would say the challenges that we face are all interconnected. If I say the ecological challenge or the environmental challenge, the degradation of the environment, the possibility of ecological collapse. If I say the nature of war, peace education, the way in which a kind of structural violence has enveloped the world. Now we're facing the Hamas-Israeli war, a reiteration of something that's an ongoing conflict that's been happening there for 57 years. And of course, Ukraine. When I say the challenge of AI, the runaway technology to do with the fears of robotization and perhaps a kind of AI technology that may take over from human agency, presenting us with all sorts of terrible scenarios of being ruled by robots, as the science fiction often tell us. I say the nature of these challenges, and many more, the subjectivity of youth, how they feel about facing these dreadful problems. The nature of these problems has changed. They've become, and the way that we've become, also interconnected. Through the birth of a kind of planetary consciousness, we see a set of challenges that are related to one another. And we, if I can put it in the short form, the survival of humanity and the survival of the planet really has to be a very central challenge, both to education but also to philosophy of education. Those are, and I'd say our understanding of those problems is now in terms of a new interconnectedness, a new kind of ecology of these problems, where they are related to one another, a new kind of, let's say, complexity. And I think, therefore, the challenges, cannot be tackled only by, one discipline. What we require is a kind of collaborative, holistic approach, through, let's say, the critical humanities, or with social sciences, or with the rest of the disciplines. These very often these problems and these challenges that we do face, do require a kind of complex understanding of scientific matters that weigh heavily on education curricula, but also on the nature of philosophical thought in regard to how best the curriculum might be delivered. So let me say the challenges are interconnected. They're massive. They have changed in their nature to a much more kind of ecologically related set of problems. I use the word epistemologically, and I think that it's a big ask of education, to tackle these by itself. We talk about the number of teachers throughout the world. Well, maybe 30 million teachers, and number of people who are interested in philosophy of education, much, much smaller. We're talking only of a few thousand, really, if we take into account all of the societies around the world, probably less than 5,000 actual members of philosophy of education societies, a very small kind of elite. I think what these problems therefore mean for philosophers of education is that we have to work in concert, not only with one another, but also with practitioners and with other disciplines outside education and outside philosophy. So, I mean, I really do think, and I think that we need a scientifically informed approach to many of the challenges that we face. And I think that ultimately, when we consider the way in which these challenges and problems have changed, we will see that it's a kind of new interconnectedness in thought and also in practice.
Oh, wow. So those are certainly very daunting problems that we face. And as you say, it's maybe perhaps the unprecedented thing is the extent to which they are all interconnected now. And to some extent, you've already at least started answering the second question, which was, what do you think philosophy of education has in responding to this challenge or this set of challenges, and or in responding to the uncertain times we find ourselves in. So I think you've to some extent already started answering that, but I don't know whether you would want to elaborate more on what you think philosophy of education particularly has to offer in responding to those challenges.
Well, I think it has a huge amount to offer. I mean, for a group of people, a very small group of people globally, as I say, I'd be surprised if there's more than 5,000. I think, in the traditional sense of philosophy of education going back to Confucius, going back to Plato or to Socrates, of course, let's say there are strong angles from traditional philosophical branches of epistemology, the interconnectedness of knowledge, for instance, in this new digital environment, but also ethics. We're talking about a kind of intercultural ethics and a global ethics now, dealing with these sorts of problems. So we have really, in terms of a history of the subject matter of philosophy, let me say, at least 5,000 years experience to draw on, but also beyond that, let's say the questions around theology and religion that go back earlier than 5,000 years. And in particular, I'm interested in one kind of conception here that I call the apocalypse, really, apocalyptic, more generally apocalyptic thinking, and apocalyptic, let me say, the apocalyptic problematic in Western philosophy. What does it mean? Who articulates it? Where does it come from? And I think, we can say even before the Judaic-Christian, books, the book of Daniel and the Hebrew Bible and book of Revelations in the Bible, were the source of kind of the notion of apocalypse. What we see now, increasingly is a kind of secularization of that term, and a deep code, particularly in philosophy of history during the 19th century, that was tied to apocalyptic conceptions that came out of an apocalyptic literature that saw an impending doom and also the intervention of a god, of some supernatural force, with the possibility of a new beginning. So, that kind of metaphorical thinking is extremely, extremely important in the West, but it's also important in other cultures, not only in Judaism, but also in Islamic thinking, in Hindu thinking, in the thinking of the indigenous peoples from Mesoamerica. So it's not universal, but certainly it's quite dominant. What I want to be able to do is to introduce that line of thinking into philosophy of education as a way of dealing with the way in which apocalyptic narratives frame the multiple crises that we face and how we might understand that. Because, the current generation of children, of students, grow up in zombie culture. And by that, I'm not being disrespectful. I'm saying, they grow up in the science fiction field where aliens come to Earth, or we face some, huge natural disaster, an earthquake, or a tsunami, or whatever, and really, in some sense, the apocalyptic narratives, they do prepare us for what is to come, but at the same time, they end up by normalizing and trivializing the concept. So so there's some interesting tasks for philosophy of education when it adopts what Derrida calls the apocalyptic tone in philosophy, when it starts to answer those questions that originate in religion and theology and are carried secularized through into philosophy, let's say philosophy generally, but specifically European philosophy after Friedrich Nietzsche. And in particular, I'm thinking, Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, Deleuze, Lyotard, and others, many others, but also in the German context, where apocalyptic thinking is and has been very, very strong. Start going back to Hegel's philosophy of history. So I think what I'm trying to do, really coming up to this conference, is rather biting off far more than I can chew, and probably more than the audience can cope with in one single session. It's apocalyptic thinking. What is its history? How might it make a contribution in philosophy education in terms of ethics and epistemology, and in terms of the multiple overlapping challenges that we face, that humanity faces. So yeah, that's the task. It's quite a large one, I would say. But anyway, I'm going to have a shot at it. So this is what I've been working on in the last 5 years or so.
Okay, well, so not only daunting interconnected problems, but apocalyptic conclusion. You just reminded me, of course, there is that notion of the zombie apocalypse.
Yes.
Well, you did mention that this is just as a sort of a follow-up, really, to that, because speaking of the interconnected nature of the problems, and you mentioned Confucianism, but when you were talking about apocalyptic thinking and you referred to various traditions, you didn't mention the Confucian tradition or any Chinese tradition. Did they have some equivalent in Chinese traditions to the apocalyptic thinking?
Yes, I think they do. I mean, I think that, when you look at the Chinese calendar in particular, and you see, the new beginning, the beginning of the new calendar, as you do, I should say, not only for most classical civilizations, and I use the word civilizations here, but it's a hotly contested term. I should use the term, I mean, China uses the term civilization. It likes civilization and civilizational analysis. I mean, President Xi uses civilizational analysis. You see one of the three major documents, global documents that he released this year. One was on security, one was on development, one was on civilization. But for us in the West, for critical thinkers in the West, the word civilization has is a critical notion that really faces decolonization. and therefore, sometimes it's seen as civilization as the binary opposition with culture, below it in some way. So we're talking about indigenous cultures, but I think it's also the case, that I want to make very strongly that, Māori, Matariki, you experienced this year. It's a fantastic celebration of the 9-star constellation and the importance of the calendar, this kind of constellation of Māori thought, but also the Mayan calendar and the other Mesoamericans who were involved in creating this calendar. The so-called long calendar that was supposed to come in, falsely interpreted by Western commentators in 2012, and of course Hollywood made a movie about it, and that passed into popular culture. But the big thing here, I should say, is the way in which the value of community, of local place, and I think the concept of a new beginning. What do new institutions look like? How should we look at the question of post-apocalyptic survival, and what does this mean for the globe? And to what extent can we work towards this in terms of some practical, a practical framework that the UNESCO, United Nations adopt in relation to global public goods? So here is their framework for dealing with these interconnected problems. Financial instability, flooding and heat dome effects, and drought, and war and conflict, and all of these in one interconnected biosphere. We have one planet. All of these things are connected. Of course, they're connected, and yet our solutions are often isolated, siloed from one another. So the new interconnectedness of thought, which is both an ethical and an epistemological question, really is I think at the centre of what I would say, the planning for post-apocalyptic survival in terms of global institutions and global ethics. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You reminded me that at the time of the Mayan calendar sort of popular culture thing, it spawned a whole load of internet memes about well, it's not the end of the world sort of thing if you don't finish working on the calendar. There was a final question and about whether there's anything else you'd like to add or talk about in the lead up to the conference in December. I don't know whether there's anything else you wanted to say or.
Well, I think, thanks. Look, I'll just say anyway, it's been very nice to meet you and to talk to you, and congratulations on winning the scholarship. I think that's fabulous. We have someone from your background and interests joining the association, and so I hope to see you face to face, and Tina also to see you face to face at the conference. So looking forward to that very much. I think what I would say is that there is a necessary spatial analysis that goes here, because both my degree and Tina's first degree was in geography, and we never we never move away from that spatial element. But in the 80s or 90s, we talked about the difference between the local and the global, and how do we resolve the local and the global, and the globalization, and a whole range of terms that really tried to take into account the new spatiality came into play. But all of this, let me say, Simon, is taking place at a time of increased geopolitical tensions between United States and China. And what we see as a result of that is increasing militarization of the Pacific. And the Pacific, the US are in the process of pivoting to Asia, away from Europe into Asia, with the development of new military bases, in Australia and in Japan and various other places. It's very worrying, I think, that we had the Asian wars going back some time to Vietnam, but a bit earlier before that. I know the ASEAN countries don't want to see war in this part of the world. I don't think New Zealand or Australia does either.
Yeah,
And yet what we see now is that all those problems are also taking place against that background of geopolitical tension between these two big countries. And does it compromise the fact that they need to work together on these common problems, the shared problems of humanity? So that's an additional concern that we have.
It's a good place to stop, I suppose, and better stop before it just sort of cuts out on me. But thank you again for this, and I look forward to meeting you and Tina in Auckland in December. So yes, I'd just like to finish with that. Thank you, Michael.
Good. Well, it's been a really thoughtful session, and your questions are great. And I think they require more than 15 minutes reflection, but I do think that this might be a direction for philosophy of education in the years to come. At least I'm going to make the case for that anyway. Nice talking to you.